thing billowing, bursting forth with the power of 10 billion butterfly sneezes.
This is Wine, Money, and Song. And if you're interested in wine and you want to learn about the best values in wine, please subscribe. So today's episode is part 5 of 2022 Bordeaux Futures, which wines are the best values. Now, this week 21 wines hit the market, and yesterday, being Friday, Lafite hit the market, and Lafite came in at about $7.85. I think the first growths are going to come in from a range of $7.25 to $8.25. Mouton might be a little higher than Lafite. Haut-Brion and Margaux are usually a little below Lafite. And Latour does not release future prices because they don't participate in the futures program. So I'm not going to say much about the first growths because, as you know, the first growths, besides being wildly expensive, they've been making some great wines. In this vintage, I'm sure they knocked the ball out of the ballpark. So it's going to be up to you. Do you want to spend that type of money on the wines? And first growths especially need 20 years, 15, and in a vintage like this, it's going to be 20, 25 years. So your choice. And I will not be commenting on value about first growths and some of the right bank wines and Pomerol. I'm not going to be talking about value with Trot Noir, Bio-Certain. We know those are going to be spectacular wines, but they're not going to be cheap. So understand that. So a summary next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list the best values in the 2022s under $50. And I'll have a section, best values under $100. Wine's $100, good value. Well, yeah. And then after that, I'll have the blue chip chateaus that I think are worthy of looking at for their value. And it's hard to say some of these wines are going to be $300-$400. But the reason why I will mention them, because I think they're going to go up in price. And as you've seen with Les Carmes, Haut-Brion, Cheval Blanc, and Léoville Barton, they've been sold out quickly. I'm sure more will appear on the market, but at a higher price. So I've been going through all the ratings, and the wine ratings are just off the charts. The average score on most of the wines are like 95. And this vintage is already anointed as a great vintage. And I'm looking at the ratings, and I noticed James Suckling, who is known to be a pretty high marker. He's the head arsonist in this thing, driving the prices up, and he loved the vintage, and he has high ratings on it. And the people who control pricing of a vintage are the wine writers. If they give glowing ratings, the consumers run after them. And this vintage, that's what's happening. And the ratings are incredibly high. If you're a 92 or a 93, that's kind of like a B in school with this vintage. You have to be above 95 to get an A- or an A. And that's wildly high. So be aware of that. And as I said, this is part 5, and I never thought I'd ever get a little tired of talking about Bordeaux, but I am. I'm doing all the research on the numbers, on the prices, other vintages that are available, what are the new arrivals. It's been exhaustive doing this. So, as I said, next week we'll have the final segment, and I will line up the wines that I think are the best values at certain price points. The one thing I want to talk about is the really strange thing about this vintage is I've never seen comments coming from estate owners, chateau owners, that they were very pensive, very skeptical going into the harvest. And almost 9 out of 10 of them were shocked how good the wines were. And that goes all the way from Lafite, all the way through Coes-Turnell. Like the original producers were just surprised how fresh the wines were. Explosively soft, precocious wines in the beginning. And I think that you should consider certain areas are going to do very well in this type of vintage. And I've said before, the heavier soils like Saint-Eustache, I don't think you could go wrong in Saint-Eustache. And as I'll list next week, the best values, but you can just throw a dart at Saint-Eustache and it's going to be one of the best wines that they made in a long time. Even wines like Fallon-Segura, that they make good wines. They made an exceptional wine, and it's something like $56, something like that. But you know you're going to get a really good wine if you like Fallon-Segura, and it's not going to be hard picking good wines in this vintage. There'll be other questions about the ageability, but I'll go into that later. But also Pomerol. Pomerol seems to have really produced spectacular wines. And I scratched my head a little bit when I heard that because Merlot has problems in the really hot vintages. A matter of fact, a lot of people are ripping up Merlot when it comes time to replant, and they're planting Cabernet Sauvignon. And the reason why they're doing that is because Cabernet is more resistant to the heat and the drought, and it has thicker, stronger skins, not as delicate and plump like the Merlot can be, and more susceptible to sunburn. But it seems that the 2022 Pomerols are from Trot Noir all the way through. I read all the comments, and I've seen all the ratings, and this vintage is going to come down to two things about ageability and price. But my opinion right now on this vintage, what I compare it to, it sounds like 1982, which was my first vintage that I did barrel tasting futures, and 2009 or maybe 10, because they were both hot years and alcoholic. 82 was so precocious out. The wines were so delicious when I had them out of barrel. And I was just scratching my head, and I said, these wines just taste delicious now. How are these wines going to age? Well, guess what? They're still alive and kicking. I had an 82 Menet, and I think I paid $7 a bottle back then, wholesale. And the wine is still delicious and beautiful. And I have 82s every few months, and I'm never, ever dissatisfied with them. And some need more time. So that's where I draw the line. 2009 was very lush and very delicious and not a classic year. It was very ripe, but they're going to age well because they're balanced and they're just so delicious. And the 2010s, a lot of alcohol in those wines, and I know they got high scores and people think it's a great vintage, but I still scratch my head. And I want to draw your attention to 2016, which is the last really classical vintage in Bordeaux that I think occurred. And it got kudos from everyone, and all my friends who I trust and people in the Bordeaux wine business. They say that's a great classic vintage. And I've gone in, and the wines that I bought, I've tried some of the wines recently, and they've all have closed up tight as a turtle, putting their head inside the shell. And they're going to be wrapped up there for a good 5 years or so. So you got to understand, great vintages act differently. And it's a classic vintage, but it's a 2016 is going to be a wait. So thinking about the ageability of these wines, there's nothing to compare them with as far as, because these are knocking on the door, these wines. It's about 15%. Most of the wines are 14.5. Some of them are right on 15. And the way that the wines were made in the winery, the vinification processes were very different, and they've changed. And we really don't know if these changes in vinification process are going to affect the ageability of these wines. And that's going to be a big question. And in the future, it's obvious these wines are going to be precocious right out of the starting gate. But will they shut down later? Will they close up? Or all of a sudden, after 5 years, those high alcohols and the fruit will start fading and we'll get some pruniness? I don't know. And I don't think the wine writers know, because this vintage is so unique and special. And it surprised all the producers. So we're going to unfold the story as it goes along. But as I said, some incredible wines, but at high prices. And this is going to be your choice. That, do you want to spend the money, if you want to own? And I always say to people, when you buy Bordeaux, there's only 2 times to buy. You either buy a great vintage and you pay up, or you buy something of value that you've tasted and you've liked, and you think it offers you a great deal. So this vintage, it's going to be more, you're going to pay up 25% more than you did formerly. And as I'd outlined before, there's tons of reasons why it's a higher price. So we're going to stay along with that. And next week, I'm going to be in California. So I usually release each episode on Sunday morning. I'm probably not going to be able to do it until next Tuesday. So sorry about that, but it'll be worth waiting for, because I'll have my final synopsis for you and a list of wines. So hopefully, thank you for viewing, and the response has been good to these Bordeaux episodes.